I welcome you to this new live session with H&N International. I'm Juliana Armijo, Technical Services Manager for Latin America. Today, we'll be talking about feeding for success, addressing some topics like as feed efficiency, health and egg quality, nutritional strategies for heat stress, net energy, pullet developer and pre-layer feeds, fibers, ingredients, and coarse particle size, ingredient quality considerations, and multi-grain mash diet. As you can see, this will be a very interesting session. This presentation will be conducted by our external speaker, Judy O'Keeffe. Judy holds a Bachelor of Agricultural Science from Latrobe University. She has over 25 years of experience in the poultry industry and is currently the director of Sure Feed Pty and a consultant animal nutritionist, specialized in poultry in Australia. Due to her busy schedule and the significant different time zone, Judy will be not able to join us live today to answer your questions. If you have any question, please write them in LinkedIn comment. However, we will send all your questions to her, and in that way, she will be able to answer them, and H&N will send all answers as soon as possible. Remember, in case of technical problems on LinkedIn, there is a backup broadcast on the H&N website. This link will appear in LinkedIn comments. Well, let's go with Judy's presentation.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for inviting me to come and speak with you today. Now, you may notice on the program the topic I've got is feeding for egg size in the tropics. But I thought about it and really I wanted to broaden the subject a little bit and make it about feeding for success in general, because in my opinion, these are all the many things that you need to do to overcome the challenges of feeding in a hot climate. And some of you may be from areas where it's not hot, but these are still important for you to know. And some of you may be from areas where the weather is seasonal. I still think these things you apply all year round, but it's especially important in a hot, humid climate. So the questions that people usually ask about feed is, what is the protein level and what is the price? So what's wrong with that? There's a lot more to the subject than protein, as Javier has already outlined. Feed includes 32 essential nutrients if you count everything that's in the premix. There are many additive options that are available now to improve digestibility, to support the feed efficiency, resilience, and also to improve egg quality. Cost per kilogram of egg is far more important than feed price. So this is where you look at the benefit of performance, spend money to make money. And feed quality control is critical. A formulation in theory and how that matches what happens in practice. So over the years, the breeder companies have done a spectacular job in selecting a highly efficient bird. They're now maturing earlier, have greater rate of lay, increased egg weight, better persistency of lay, that means they hold on their rate of lay for longer, lower mortality, lower feed conversion, and better late lay shell quality. And these drive profit. You need all of these things to be good to make money. So what do we need to do to try and achieve the hen's genetic potential? Well, it starts at the breeder farm, depends on what happens in the hatchery, obviously relies on the management of the growing chick and pullet, but it cannot be achieved without careful formulations and presentations of the replacement pullet diets. And I'm going to change that slide to say hybrid diet instead of pre-lay diet. And it depends greatly on nutrient intake during the lay and especially the early lay period. Understanding flock uniformity is key, or really I should say understanding the lack of uniformity. So if there's a lack of uniformity, you need to think about the bottom third of the flock and how to pick up the bottom third of the flock. And this is particularly important if you're in a hot tropical climate. Or in Australia, my challenge is feeding birds in free-range situations. So if ever you have to cross the free-range bridge in the future, this is the single biggest challenge. So what does uniformity look like? We hope that you have 80% uniformity in your flock. We strive to achieve better than that. But that curve can change two different ways. It can become shorter and flatter, which shows a lack of uniformity. But it's not uncommon for the graph to be skewed to the low side, meaning that there's a bottom third of the flock that's really struggling. So we need to do everything we can to avoid that. So the aim of diet design, or the job of every nutritionist, is to try and match nutrient intake to the nutrient requirements of the bird. Now the nutrient intake is the feed intake multiplied by the nutrient density of the feed. Now, if you have inconsistencies between flocks, that affects both the nutrient requirements and the feed intake. So the nutritionist might need to adjust for both of those things to try and compensate. But nutrient requirements can depend on the strain of the hen, its body weight, growth rate, and body composition, the feathering status, or what the goal is. Do you want a lot of feathers or not? Is it something you wish to invest in? What the temperature is it in the comfort zone or are you outside the comfort zone? Other sources of stress, such as aggression between birds, if they're not managed well and they're not content. Sort of the overall health status, how they're responding to their vaccines and so forth. Level of activity, as I say, in my free-range farms, I have to factor in activity. And also, what egg size do you want, or what egg mass? Egg mass is the egg weight multiplied by the rate of lay. What are your goals? So you have to know your own situation. In a perfect world, we strive for consistency and we aim to measure the inconsistency. But in reality, you measure what you can and you speculate about the rest. In other words, you guess. You have your best guess. And then the nutritionist will apply a diet that's balanced around those assumptions, and then we feed it to the birds. And you need to measure the result. Set a baseline. Okay, when we fed this diet, that happened. And then we go back and we make further adjustment and we compare that to the baseline that we set initially. It's trial and error. There is no perfect diet because every situation is different. So what this means is in those different situations, we need really good collaboration and communication between farming, veterinary and nutrition staff. Now, I like to think that birds can handle the bumps in the road. I say to my farmers, every flock of birds is going to live through 2 summers, and in Australia, maybe they're going to live through 2 winters. So they're going to hit a number of bumps in the road, and it's a question of how resilient they are to try and respond, get better, recover, okay? So transfer into the layer house is a setback. Vaccinations can be a setback. Then there's infections, parasites, dysbacteriosis, which is when the gut microflora gets out of balance. If there's mycotoxins coming in through the feed raw materials. Insufficient nutrient intake, or if there's a big change to the diet that upsets the birds. Certain stresses where the number of nutrients coming in doesn't meet their nutrient output, and that's most likely to happen at peak rate of lay and then at peak egg mass, which is 10 to 15 weeks later. Rate of lay may have come down a bit by then, but egg size has gone up, yeah? So they hit a second critical point where the amount of nutrients coming in might not meet what's going out. Extreme weather events. I had a very bumpy flight coming into Manila yesterday because the tropical storm was going through. I'm not used to tropical storms where I'm from. And then competition and aggression with their sisters. So see down there, I say feed for resilience. I want a bird that can handle it. I want a bird that can bounce back. So what does resilience look like? Say if a bird gets a wound of some description, can it heal quickly? When you give it a vaccine, do we get a good response to that vaccine? Or if it's a wild infection that they're coming across, does their immune system respond well? Do they get better sooner? Inflammation is an interesting one. Some inflammation is good. It's your body's way of coping. Too much inflammation is bad, because if there's too much inflammation, it sets off a series of events in the body, and it can divert nutrients away from growth and productivity in a way that's not profitable, it's not productive, yeah? And one of the big problems with inflammation is that we can get leaky gut. You may have heard of leaky gut, when the lining of the gut is affected in a way that some of the bacteria gets across into the bloodstream, yeah? So in heat stress, we know this can happen. And one of the advantages of mitigating against heat stress or trying to help the bird cope with heat stress is we can greatly reduce leaky gut, yeah? Very important. So coping with stress, there's a hormone in the body, corticosterone, which is the chronic stress hormone, okay? What we want is a slow, steady release of corticosterone, because birds can run out of corticosterone. If they make too much too quickly for too long, they run out. And when they do, they fall over and die, okay? So we see this happen in Australia. I'll have an extreme day, 45, 47 degrees Celsius. Terrible, hot, dry day. We get bad bushfires in Australia when it's like that. Farm will ring me up and they'll say, we lost 100,000 birds last night. They'll just die. And this is why. And what we do in that situation is we feed them vitamin C in the water 4 days in advance of the hot weather. We know it's coming. You have to get it in advance because it'll slow down the production of corticosterone and the birds will survive, yeah? Now what some of the farms do is they put protected, coated vitamin C in the feed all summer because they get that much hot weather, it's the best way to cope, okay? I want to talk to you about the barrier in the body between the inside and the outside and how very important that is. So you may have heard words like epithelium or endothelium, or your skin. These are the places that are the surface between the outside and the inside, and they are an important physical barrier to the insults that are experienced by the bird, okay? Skin, gut, respiratory tract, reproductive tract. The barrier between the inside of your gut and your bloodstream is a physical barrier between the inside and the outside. Do you understand? Right? Now, this picture with the tissue and the blue, I actually got that when the COVID pandemic started in March 2020 when it first came to Australia. I'm the youngest of a very big family, and some of my siblings are in their late 60s and early 70s. So I sent them that picture and I said, we're not immune to this virus. We're not going to have a vaccine for more than a year. What I want you to do is I want you to go to the chemist and buy zinc tablets and vitamin C tablets and vitamin D tablets, and I want you to take them every day because that's all I can tell you. That's all we've got. And make sure you eat a nice healthy diet with plenty of protein and eat your vegetables. Because I was worried about my older brothers and sisters getting sick. Some of them who I know get bad chest infections. Yeah? Why did I tell them that? Because I've been doing it in chickens for 20 years. And I know it works. Okay? I ended up going to Chemist Warehouse and buying a box full of jars of vitamins myself, and I ended up posting them to them. So let's look at the picture of the lung, the alveoli. When people were dying of COVID in 2020, that's what was killing them. They were getting inflammation in the alveoli, and the alveoli were filling up with fluid. Yeah? And that was being caused by a cytokine storm, which was too much inflammation. And they found that when they gave people vitamin D, they didn't die. And it was the Spanish that started doing it. Okay? So, say if we have vaccines, we need to help the vaccines work better by improving the physical barrier so that the bird has less of a challenge from the disease in the first place. Make sense? Now, all of those nutrients that I just mentioned help with growth and productivity anyway. So, what does rapidly dividing tissue at all of those barriers between the inside and the outside need? Cells that turn over at a high rate in those areas need vitamin A and they need zinc, and they work together. Yeah? They need antioxidants, selenium, vitamin E, vitamin C. Vitamin K is important for wound healing, okay? Because it's all to do with blood clotting. If the blood doesn't clot, the wound's not going to heal. And if you're a laying hen and your sister is feather pecking you, or if you're getting a bit of vent trauma because you laid a really big egg and your vent gets damaged, can you see how important this is? And vitamin D just does lots of things. Apart from helping with calcium metabolism, we know immune systems need vitamin D, but we also need that muscle needs vitamin D. So everything to do with rapidly dividing tissue is very dependent on these things. But there's no point getting the micronutrients right if we haven't got protein and energy right. They all have to be right. So let's look at the little picture there. That shows the protein collagen, which is under the structure of, say, skin, for example. Collagen production is dependent on the amino acid proline, not an essential nutrient. We don't formulate on proline when we formulate poultry feed, do we? No. But proline needs vitamin C. What happens if you're vitamin C deficient? You get scurvy and your teeth drop out, okay? The pirates used to have terrible teeth because they were all vitamin C deficient. Now, where was I going with that? So with vitamin C, we don't consider it to be an essential nutrient in poultry. The bird can make it, but it makes it in the kidney. If the kidney's not healthy, the bird doesn't make enough vitamin C. So I know vitamin C in heat stress is very important, okay? We might not have enough. There's many things that we can feed that improve feed efficiency, health and egg quality. If I had another hour, I could talk about this slide for an hour. Yeah? but I'm just going to make the list. On the right-hand side, they're the ingredients that you can add to feed to improve digestibility of nutrients. Very good for carbon footprint, yeah? We'll use less soybean if we use these things. I've got them, all of them, in most of my diets. On the other side, gut health additives that do many different things. Most of my diets have got 2 of those in there. Some have got 3. And it's a question of picking combinations that work well together and picking products that make sense given the challenges and the objectives in that particular situation. Unfortunately, we have to have a lot of meetings with suppliers to understand all of those products, yeah? I have between 2 and 4 meetings with suppliers a week on this. It's overwhelming how many products there are on the market. But you get to know what works in your situation. But let's remember, success is not about the flock average. It's about the individual hen. Okay? So when you get flock average data on feed intake, flock average data on rate of lay, you've got to think about the lack of uniformity in the flock. What's going on with the individual hens that are not laying? Because they're eating feed and they're not giving you any eggs. So why did she not lay an egg today? Firstly, is she off the lay? Is she not laying eggs at all? Is her comb small and pale? Is she getting fat? Is she not laying at all? Is she short clutching? Now, a clutch is the number of days in a row that the hen lays an egg and then she takes a break. 1 day off, maybe 2, maybe 3 days off. Starts again, lays 3 or 4 eggs in a row, takes a day off. I have a little blackbird who lays a nest of eggs in my Japanese maple tree every springtime. She's got a clutch of chicks there now. She lays 5 eggs every year, 5 eggs. That's her clutch. Whereas with our laying hens, we've bred them to have longer clutches, yeah? Now, the yolk formation and ovulation relies on 2 hormones that are produced in the pituitary gland. Both of those hormones are adversely affected by stress. So this is the mechanism when a bird is suffering from heat stress. The first hormone is follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. That determines when the yolk forms in the first place, in the ovary. The second hormone is luteinizing hormone, LH. It triggers the release of the yolk that starts the formation of the egg process, okay? So if those hormones are interfered, that's why that particular bird doesn't lay an egg. So what does that look like? The picture on the right, she's laying probably 95%. She's laying an egg for 6-7 days straight before she's taking a break. Whereas the one on the right, your right, that hen is short clutching. So you can see how each egg yolk exerts dominance over the next egg yolk. Each one's a little bit bigger than the next one, yeah? So she's making us money, she's not. How do we turn on more of the hens more of the time? Okay? So we manage them to reduce stress. We feed them to be more resilient so that they can better cope with stress. Less stress, less cortisol, and the less that affects the pituitary gland. So let's talk about heat stress. This is the happy zone for chickens between 18 to 24 degrees Celsius. They call that the thermoneutral zone. Yeah? If you are hotter than that, the bird needs to expend energy to stay cool. They pant, they flap their wings. All of that requires energy. They spend less time feeding because they're uncomfortable. On the cold side, which I have to deal with in the southern states of Australia, they fluff up their wings to try and trap warm air in their feathers. They huddle together and they spend less time feeding. And again, I have to change the diets to cope with that as well. So your topic today said nutritional strategies for heat stress in the tropics or something like that. You thought I was just going to put this slide up and talk about this. Yeah? All these things are important on this slide, but everything's important. We have to get them right from day old. Okay? You can't fix a flock that's suffering from heat stress by just throwing a few things in the feed. Putting these things in the feed helps, and definitely midnight snacking helps, but it's not going to do it all by itself. So let's quickly run through them. We're aiming to increase nutrient intake. Firstly, we can do that by midnight snacking. We can increase the nutrient density of the feed. Cool water is very important. I went to one of my farms. I'm from the southern hemisphere, so the sun shines on the northern side of the shed, yeah? Because the sun's in the northern part of the sky. The pipes for his water system had the sun shining on them. The water was so hot you could make a cup of tea. Yeah? So I got him to change his water system, and the birds were drinking cool water, and they ate 10 grams more feed. Don't put water in black pipes either. Black pipes are a bad idea because it soaks up the daylight. As I've mentioned, vitamin C. Anti-inflammatories. There are some phytogenic anti-inflammatory products on the market that are very effective. They reduce leaky gut, reduce inflammation, and help the bird to cope better with heat stress. Sodium bicarbonate is interesting. When birds get hot, they pant. That reduces the amount of carbon dioxide in their blood. Yeah? It affects shell quality because we need bicarbonate and calcium to form eggshell. Yeah? So if you mess up the carbon dioxide level in the blood, that has an effect on shell quality. It's a bit more complicated than that. It's a condition called alkalosis, and I haven't got a lot of time to dwell on that today. But by putting a cap on the chloride levels of the diet, you end up with a little bit less salt and a little bit more sodium bicarbonate in the feed, and that can be good in hot weather. The last one there is net energy ratio to metabolizable energy. This is a little bit harder to explain, so you're going to have to stay with me. Are we all awake? Are we all concentrating? Okay, going to get technical now. We formulate diets on metabolizable energy, which is the second bottom one there. Okay, the top one is gross energy. How do you determine gross energy? You take 1 gram of wheat, you put it in a little machine, you burn it, and it measures how much heat comes off it. And it measures the temperature increase of 1 ml of water from 1 gram of feed, and that tells you how much energy. But that's gross energy. So when the nutritionists, the human nutritionists, tell you how much to eat, they're wrong half of the time because they're talking about gross energy, and it doesn't explain how the body works. Right? Then there's digestible energy. The pig guys use this system, or used to. Maybe 20 years ago, the pig guys were using digestible energy. You collect the faeces and you measure how much energy is in the faeces, and you take that off the gross energy. That gives you digestible energy. Then we get down to metabolizable energy. We measure the amount of energy in the gas and the urine. Now, in the case of poultry, it's uric acid that goes from the kidney out into the excreta, yeah? And that's what we use to formulate. Now, We're starting to collect data to formulate on net energy. So what's the difference between metabolizable and net energy? Heat. So when we burn starch, or we burn oil, or we burn protein for that matter, there's a certain amount of heat that gets released. What we want to do is pick the raw materials that do that the most efficiently and produce the least heat. So I'm going to ask someone to answer this question in 10 minutes. You need to repeat after me when I ask you. The net energy to metabolizable energy ratio of ingredients is not the same. It's different from one ingredient to the other. What does that look like? In corn, nearly 75% of the metabolizable energy is net energy. But look at canola oil, it's 91. So what does that mean? There's a fair amount of heat coming off corn and not much coming off canola oil. Look at soybean, it's only 61%, so that means a lot of heat. So when we're formulating diets for hot conditions, if we have enough data in our database to do it, ideally you should formulate on net energy. But say if we don't have that data, we can still make it better for the bird by using more oil and less carbohydrate in hot weather, okay? Because it will help them greatly. But to manage heat stress during lay, we've got to start by preparing a better pullet and use strategies to improve feed intake in early lay and better body reserves to draw upon when stressed for better resilience. I'm not going to dwell on this because it's already come up a couple of times a day, but we've got to focus on pullet rearing. We've got to get them right in the first 6 weeks in particular to grow the gut so that they have a better chance to eat more feed quicker coming into lay. So improved digestibility, as Javier said. I won't repeat the information that Javier has already given us. But I like to talk about pullet developer, and I'm sorry, I should have said hybrid diet instead of pre-layer diet here. But what I'm trying to do there is increase the fibre content. If I can get it over 5%, I will. And I do that by using some of the lignocellulose products that are on the market. They're ground up beechwood, and they swell up when they get wet, and they increase gut capacity. And I also introduce a little coarse limestone just to train the birds at that time. But all of this is about increasing early lay feed intake to make them more resilient when they come into lay. And if you feed coarse fibre during those stages, you can increase the size of the gizzard and they'll eat more later on. Yep. So it's really just during the early lay period where we want them to eat more feed. And if you cut the gizzard open, you can see the coarse limestone in there to be ground down very slowly to release calcium so the shell can form at night. So when we're designing layer diets, it's important to attempt to evaluate what's the cost-effective point. And this is going to depend on the price of commodities, and it's going to depend on the price of your eggs and how the grades of each egg price is changing. That's a constantly moving target, and we need good information from our organisation about how to do that. Now remember that egg mass per hen per day is rate of lay multiplied by the average egg weight. Okay? Both of those things, the rate of lay and egg size, respond to improved intake of amino acids. But you've got to have energy and linoleic acid as well. Both. So really quickly, I'm not going to dwell on this slide, but think of an amino acid as being like the brick in the brick wall where the wall is protein. Think of your hair, your fingernails, feathers on a bird, muscle, hormones, enzymes, all of those things are made of protein, yeah? Some of the bricks are essential, lysine, methionine, threonine, which means you can't make that brick in your body, you have to eat it. You have to get enough of that, otherwise you are insufficient or deficient, and that will pull up production and it will pull up growth. Some of those bricks are non-essential, which means you can make them. You can take one amino acid and turn it into another. And then you've got a third type, which we call quasi-essential. Some people may use the term provisionally essential. And as we produce diets that are lower and lower in protein, but still have the right amino acids in there, and we improve digestive efficiency, we need to start worrying about some of those, and there's a lot of research going on about that now. So, what does it mean if you haven't got enough of amino acid? Say if growth is represented by that barrel of water on the other side, yeah? If one of the amino acids is short, if it's deficient, think of the water in that barrel as being the growth being pulled up, okay? I'm not going to dwell on the numbers on this page other than to make the point that the higher the target egg mass output, I got this from Jabier's manual, so I hope it's the latest version. The higher the target egg mass, the higher the amino acid intake. And as you head this way, the diets cost more money. So you've got to figure out, is that cost effective? Is it cost effective? It depends on your egg prices. It depends on your commodities, okay? So if you're in the US and corn and soybean is cheap, it's a lot easier than if you're feeding sunflower and rice bran, okay, where your cost effective point might be in the middle or down the other side. So knowing how to increase egg size is only part of the puzzle. Very important considerations. Is that diet likely to be feasible and cost effective, which I just mentioned? Can thin-shelled eggs be avoided? And can injury to the hens be avoided if you try and make the egg bigger than the bird can cope with? So let's look at eggshell quality. I might let you just read that. But basically, the amount of shell on an egg doesn't really change very much regardless of the egg size. So the bigger the egg, the thinner the shell, yeah? So one of the things we can do as the bird ages and gets out beyond 70 weeks of age is we can pull the amino acid intake in to try and control egg size. And as Jabier explained, we increase calcium intake and we reduce phosphorus intake. It's very important not to overheat diet nutrient density. If your birds are underweight at point of lay, you've got to get them right before you put them in there. If they start laying eggs too big than what they can handle, they get egg bound, which means the egg gets stuck in the oviduct. That can be fatal, or sometimes you can manually get it out if you've got the labour to do that. Prolapse means part of the oviduct comes out of the bird. This can kill the bird. Or vent trauma is just where you get tears and blood, and then you'll get cannibalism, and then the bird might get an infection, and again, this is pretty bad. It's a real welfare issue if this is not managed. So what some people try and do is delay onset of lay by delaying light stimulation to try and get bigger eggs, but you really do run the risk of causing these things. So go back to your pullet rearing, get it right there. Theory versus reality. Here is one of my mid-lay diets in Sydney, Australia. Pretty good diet, quite proud of that. But see the feed on the right-hand side? That's what they made in the feed mill. When we analysed it, it looked nothing like the formulation. Okay? How do we make it the same? It's all about quality control in the feed mill, making sure they buy good raw materials and check them on the way in to make sure that poor ingredients are not accepted at the feed mill. And then we do routine testing to make sure that we know what we're dealing with. And as Jabier said, there's going to be a certain amount of normal variability, but we've got to eliminate the bad variability. So these are the major feedstuffs that I have in Australia. They look good, those photos, don't they? I wish the grain always looked that good when we bought it. I'm familiar with some of the other ingredients that you have more often in Southeast Asia and into South Asia. You've got to watch out for mycotoxins, hey? So you need to buy to a moisture standard, you need to understand the mycotoxin load coming in, and you need to add mycotoxin products if you believe you have a risk. And the question I asked Jabir when he was talking about pullets earlier was, when we use fibrous byproducts to try and get the fibre levels that we need in the pullet feed, this has got husky material. The husk is the outside of the grains that it was processed from at the beginning, and that's where the fungus is, okay? So when we use byproducts, we're concentrating the mycotoxins in the feed. So we need to be aware of the risks and we need to manage those risks. And then the other big one is when we're using soybean meal or DDGS, we need to be looking out for whether it's under-processed or over-processed. When it's over-processed, the digestibility of the amino acids greatly reduces. There's a thing called Maillard reactions. I won't explain exactly what they are, but suffice to say, if you have overly heat-treated raw materials, the digestibility of the amino acids goes right down, and that's why the diet might not be performing very well. Okay? Now in soybean, if it's under-processed, there's an anti-nutritive factor in soybeans called trypsin inhibitor. It basically messes up the bird's own protein digestion enzymes. Yeah? Now, when you heat treat soybean, which they do when they make normal soybean, it knocks that out. But if they haven't heated it enough, it's still there, and then you've got a problem. So we look at the diet, we think the diet should be fine, but the birds are telling us no, and we need to be thorough and try and find out where it's going wrong. And it can be confusing because there's on-farm factors and weather and everything else is varying too. But it's a process of elimination. You must check everything. So isn't that beautiful feed? Yeah? I wish I could afford to feed that looks like that all the time. Every now and then in Australia, I can, and I get brilliant results. Why? Because apart from the fact the raw materials are good quality, there's lots of different ingredients in the feed. And there's an advantage to having diets that have lots of different ingredients. Number one advantage is, say if the ingredients do vary in protein or other levels, if you only have 3 main ingredients in your feed, they might all go up together and they might all go down together. Whereas if you've got several ingredients in the feed, they might cancel each other out and you've got a more consistent feed from one day to the next. It's statistics. It's just a mathematical reality. The other thing is we know that if you speed up protein digestion and you slow down carbohydrate digestion, we get a better overall performance. And one of the best ways to do that is to have a variety of commodities in your diet. So say if you're least cost formulating, it will say, oh, I just use corn, soybean, DDGs and sunflower. But say if you can spend a little bit more money and put a few more ingredients in your feed, the diet can perform better than it appears to on paper. So simple diets that look cheap might actually cost you more money in the long run. Okay, how am I going for time? I've pulled up short, so there'll be time for questions if you want to ask me questions. So in conclusion, cost per kilogram of egg is more important than feed price. Okay? So we need to stay abreast of shifting market ingredient costs and egg break prices. Feed quality is critical. We must invest in feed quality control. It's not cheap, but we must do it. It's not just protein, but 32 essential nutrients must be right. Make sure your premix with all your vitamins and minerals is up to date and not something that's 20 years old. Measure what you can, speculate about the rest to best adjust nutrient density, apply diets, assess and adjust again. This never stops. Feed for resilience and profit by applying complementary feed additives that improve digestion, absorption and uptake of nutrients, health and egg quality. And remember, stressed and dead hens don't lay eggs. Okay, so we need to make them more resilient so that they can cope with that heat stress or whatever type of stress that you have in your system. All right? Now, since we're in the Philippines, and I know how everyone in the Philippines loves their music, I have one last slide for the music fans, and I want you to raise your hand if you get the joke. Do you get the joke? They don't get the joke? Okay. You get it? You're laughing because you don't, okay. There's a famous song in the 90s written by Mark Knopfler and Dire Straits. Okay? Da 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 da. They don't know. Money for nothing and your chicks for free is what he says in the song. Yeah? Okay, I got one. So my point here is there's no money for nothing in the poultry industry. We have to work hard. Okay, questions?
We want to thank Judy for her presentation and for sharing her knowledge and experience. Remember, Judy could not join us live today, and she will answer your question after this session, so please write them in LinkedIn comments. H&N will send her responses to you as soon as possible. We also want to thank all of you for your time and all your questions. We will come back with another live session on May 19th in a roundtable with the participation of Fernando Carrasquiel and Emilio Escapatillo to talk about how to rear pullet for 500 or more eggs. Stay tuned. Have a great day.